All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into what is basically one of the biggest family feuds in history. We're talking about the moment England, the powerful parent, and its American colonies, the ambitious child, decided they just couldn't live together anymore. We're going to break down exactly how this relationship fell apart and, lit the fuse for a revolution. Okay, so let's get right into it. To really understand what happened, it helps to think of this whole thing as a giant family drama. So picture this. On one side, you've got England, the parent, who's convinced it knows best and expects everyone to just follow the rules. And on the other side, well, that's the American colonies, acting like a teenager who's growing up fast and starting to think the rules are frankly ridiculous.
So, in the beginning, things were, pretty simple. England laid down the law, the house rules, if you will, and these rules really only had one purpose: to make the parent country, England, as rich and powerful as possible.
Now, the official name for this family financial plan was mercantilism. The idea was super simple. A country's power comes from its wealth. The more gold you have, the more powerful you are. And the colonies? They were the golden goose, the key to making sure the family was the most powerful one on the block.
So how did this plan actually work? Well, it was a two-step process. First, get your hands on as much gold and silver as you can. Second, and this is the big one, make sure you sell way more stuff than you buy. The colonies were there to provide all the cheap raw materials, lumber, tobacco, you name it. And then they had to buy back all the expensive finished goods from England. It was a totally one-sided deal. Designs for the parent always came out ahead.
Well, you can probably guess what happened next, right? The teenager starts to get a mind of its own. The colonies began pushing back, mainly by smuggling goods and trading with other countries, like France and the Netherlands. This was a huge no-no, a total violation of the family's economic rules.
And how did England react? Exactly like a frustrated parent. It cracked down hard. First came the Navigation Acts in 1651, trying to force all trade through England. When Massachusetts kept breaking the rules anyway, England just revoked its charter. Gone. Then King James II tried to mash all the northern colonies into one giant dominion just to control them better. But all this did was make the colonists even angrier.
But then, something totally unexpected happened. There's a big power struggle back in England, the Glorious Revolution, and a new, massive rivalry with France started taking up all of London's attention. England basically got distracted and stopped micromanaging the colonies. This hands-off policy got a fancy name: salutary neglect. It's this idea that, hey, maybe looking the other way is actually good for business.
And this wasn't just for a year or two. We're talking about decades, where the colonies were more or less left to their own devices. Sure, the king still had a governor in charge, but the real power was in the local colonial assemblies because they controlled the money. The kid was learning how to run its own life, pay its own bills, and it was getting a real taste for independence.
So while all this is happening, while England's kind of looking the other way, the colonies aren't just growing up politically. They're developing these really unique personalities, creating two very different kinds of societies that were, each in their own way, becoming distinctly American.
And you can see this huge difference taking shape. In the South, you've got this rural society built around massive plantations growing cash crops like tobacco. But up north, totally different story. It's a buzzing, diverse economy, with major port cities like Boston and New York becoming these hubs of trade and commerce. They weren't just economic differences, they were the DNA of two separate American cultures.
But here's the thing. Both of these economies, the North and the South, were caught up in something much bigger and, honestly, much darker: the triangular trade. It was this brutal, globe-spanning network. Rum from New England would go to Africa, where it was traded for enslaved people. Those people were then forced onto ships for a horrific journey to the West Indies, where their labor produced sugar, which then went back to New England to make more rum.
This leg of the journey, the Middle Passage, it was just the horrifying heart of this whole system. We're talking millions of people crammed into ships under conditions that are just unimaginable. The sheer cruelty is hard to wrap your head around, and it's this brutal system that built so much of the wealth in the colonies.
So, at the same time all this economic stuff is going on, there's a revolution happening in people's heads. Two huge movements were sweeping through the colonies. You had the Enlightenment, which was all about reason and science, and this radical idea of natural rights, that you're born with rights that no king can touch. And then you had the Great Awakening, a religious revival that told people to connect with God on their own terms, which made them start questioning the authority of the old established churches. What did they have in common?
They both taught people to question authority.
Okay, so you've got this long simmering family tension, right? It's about to absolutely boil over. But what pushed it over the edge wasn't just an internal argument. It was a massive crisis that the family had to face together, a huge war against their biggest rival, France.
The French and Indian War was a brutal worldwide conflict. For years, the British and their colonial allies fought the French and their Native American allies for control of North America. It was long, it was bloody, it was expensive, but eventually, thanks to a guy named William Pitt, the British started to win.
And look, this wasn't just a victory. This was a total game changer. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 pretty much kicked France out of North America for good. All of a sudden, the British Empire was bigger and more powerful than ever. The parent and the child had fought together, side by side, and they had won.
So they won. Together. This should have been great, right? A real moment of family unity. They beat their biggest enemy. But instead of bringing them closer, this shared victory is the very thing that ended up tearing them apart. So what on earth went wrong?
The problem was this number right here. The war had been ridiculously expensive, leaving Britain with an absolutely crushing mountain of debt. To put it bluntly, the parent country had protected its kid, won this huge empire, and was now flat broke. So how do you think Britain planned on solving this little money problem? Well, it turned to its now pretty successful child, the American colonies. The party was over. The era of salutary neglect was done. The message from London was loud and clear. You helped make this mess, now you're going to help pay for it. My roof, my rules. All right, first up on the new rules list, the Proclamation of 1763. To avoid getting into another expensive war, this time with Native Americans, Britain just drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains and said, nope, you can't cross this. For the colonists who felt they had just fought and died for that exact land, this felt like a total betrayal.
And then, of course, came the taxes. Britain's new prime minister, a guy named George Grenville, was put in charge of fixing the finances. His big idea? For the very first time, Britain was going to directly tax the colonies, just to raise money. His first major move was the Sugar Act. And this thing was more than just a tax. It was a total overhaul of the system. It lowered taxes on some things to try and stop smuggling, but it also added brand new taxes on other things. And this was the real kicker. It said that if you were accused of smuggling, you wouldn't get a trial by a jury of your friends anymore. No. You'd face a single judge appointed by the crown.
And really, this gets to the absolute heart of the problem. You had an entire generation of colonists who had grown up with a ton of freedom, basically running their own affairs. And now, all of a sudden, the parent was back, changing all the rules, taking away their rights, and treating them like little kids again. It just felt like a massive betrayal.
So you see, this wasn't just about taxes anymore. Not really. It was a fundamental clash over identity. The colonies saw themselves as adults, but Britain still saw them as children who had to do what they were told. With England tightening its grip and the colonies feeling their freedom slipping away, the stage was set for one final, explosive confrontation. Which leaves us with the big question: what happens when leaving the family feels like the only way to be free?